Welcome everybody on another beautiful summer day.
It is beautiful out there.
Evening.
It's incredible.
Less than 14 hours of daylight, by the way. I'll
Southern
call the
Shockers.
meeting to order right at 7 o'clock. First item on the agenda, are there any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda that we know of?
No, sir.
No?
We do have the Creekside agreement.
Okay, there's, we talked about adding the Creekside stormwater agreement. We share the stormwater system with Creekside because the town has some impervious surface that drains into it as part of the Act 250, and there's been a slight change to that with the new road, increase the amount of town impervious surface, so the ratio now, which reflects on the shared costs and maintenance of that system, has changed. So we could consider approving that. So we'll add that
The alarm as well.
to, right, 6A, I guess.
We can remove, it'll be 5. It will remove alarm ordinance.
Okay,
And it's there if you want.
all right.
Doesn't matter.
Then on our agenda, we always have a place for a motion for executive session, but don't expect we'll be going into executive session. And then,
Removing the-
okay, another item is we will remove the, consider approving the alarm ordinance. We were hoping to have both Anthony and Al Barber here to discuss it. And Al's not feeling well, and so he won't be here. But we'll still have a discussion, but we won't consider approving that ordinance. It's one we've already seen, but I have a few questions. I think it's worth having a discussion to be prepared.
The fire chief and the police chief.
Both
You
fire,
look like Anthony.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
yeah, the police chief and the fire chief. Thank you. Next item is public comment. Is anybody here to add to public comment?
Kim, are you here?
Okay, you can introduce yourself. If you want to come up, you can do that.
Kim Coates from Texas Hill. Dust control. Once it goes to done by past me and further on.
Okay,
They've
so
done the hill twice. Nothing past me.
we
They
get,
stop at Seneca Creek, and that's it. I'm just like a tenth of a mile down the road, and I asked the guy that does the plowing, why can't you go just past my place and turn around? He acted like, well, he ought to back up. I said, I've seen you back up before in other places. Why can't you do it in front of me? Because it is ridiculous. Gil put a sign out on Sunday telling people that we have to breathe in the road dust, along with the walkers and the bikers. And they seem just to fly right by and don't even notice. Now, if I put boards down in the road, would they slow down? That's my question. Can you authorize speed bumps in front of my place to slow the traffic down so that if you're not going to do dust control, at least speed bumps would slow them down so the dust would fly?
so I think we got your email late this afternoon, just before the meeting. You provided some pictures.
Yes,
Of the
you'll
problem.
see them tonight.
Yeah. And so, obviously, Mike Anthony's not here, so he hasn't had a chance to hear the complaint.
I do know
Well, I
that,
complain almost every year. It
I
doesn't seem to do any good.
do know for the dust control, it's application of calcium chloride, and there needs to be rain.
We've
at
had
that
rain.
point. Right.
We had
so-
2 torrential downpours last week, and I was expecting, okay, the next day they'll be up there.
Right.
No, the next rain came. Nothing.
Yeah.
It's been nothing.
There-
8 hours is nothing. And I'm sick of it.
I understand your concern. They do have to prioritize all the different roads
Yes,
in town.
we're
and
just
different
the little
pieces of it.
people.
Right.
You know, you have the priorities of your friends and whatever, and your own interests. Well, I don't give a rat's ass about anybody else's interests. I'm just livid. Every year I have to say something. I can't fathom anybody wanting the town to take over 116 when they have roads they can't deal with now. Now, is anybody here a fan of Peter Sellers?
I think we
Have you
will
heard
keep
of-
the topic
Have
on
you
your
heard of
topic.
Peter Sellers,
So
please?
we've heard your complaint and we are listening. We
Okay.
will talk to Mike Anthony about it.
Yes, and how about the
and-
hill in front of my house that the town has built over the years? Where the rain goes down into my garage.
Well, this is the first I've heard of it, so if you have more complaints
I mentioned it
besides
to
dust, then maybe you
the
should
town
mention
administrator.
whatever else
I
you're
said it doesn't have
complaining
to be done
about.
tomorrow. How about 2 years? Now, a year has passed and nothing's been done. And now, Mike Anthony, I brought that up to him about the hill they made in front of my house. And he said, well, they were so overwhelmed by the state ordinances about the ditching taking place. And it's like, oh, we don't have time for the small stuff. So, what in hell is gonna be done anywhere in town if they're only gonna deal with they can't deal with the small stuff? Because most of the stuff in town is the small stuff. And if you don't do the small stuff, then why even bother doing anything in town?
So Kim, I think they've heard your concerns and we'll certainly pass them on to the highway foreman. They do.
Oh, won't get me anywhere. Waste of time.
Well, we'll ask Michael
Yep.
and see where it stands. And the other thing, the ditch, has that been an issue right along, or the drainage from the road?
I think what she was referring to is, he was talking about the work that they have to do for the municipal roads general permit, the prioritizing the hydrologically connected sections of segments of road. So I think she's talking about, maybe she talked about some of the rate, how the road has gotten raised up over time as more materials been built up over the years. So
Okay.
I can.
Is she suggesting that that particular stretch of road is more dusty than any other dirt road in town? Is that even a thing?
Well, she said the dust control doesn't go all the way down to her house, which is, it's hard to understand.
So that'll be
why.
something certainly to inquire about, right?
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
we could have this as an agenda item.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly talk to Mike. I
Yeah, we
know
can
they
ask
do.
Mike to
Yeah,
tell us.
they do.
He can tell us how much
Yeah.
calcium chloride he's applied and whether it's been I think every year's been usually difficult. Maybe, I would say recently, the last 3 or 4 weeks probably has been pretty challenging with no real rain and,
And the downpours don't help the situation.
Right,
Chloride, you have to have a light rain.
Light
You can't
rain.
have a downpour because
right.
it just washes off.
Right.
I mean, their road, their house is right, very close to the road. That's part of the issue.
yeah.
They're literally probably 20 feet from the road.
And the picture showed very dusty. All right,
If there's any kind of barrier that you put up, like you put up a snow fence in the wintertime for snow drifts, is there such a thing for,
Blacktop,
there you go.
that's a barrier.
Yeah.
well, and, you know, I appreciate the fact that they don't apply the calcium chloride unless it's gonna do some good. And because that's just a waste of money. So, I think he's, you know, knows how to do it and, you know, that's a $40,000 budget item, something like that.
I know,
Maybe
it's
more?
been reduced in the past,
Yeah.
I can't remember where
And
it's
then
at
it got
now.
voted back up.
Yep.
So I think it's probably around that amount for the calcium chloride. So it's significant cost, and I wouldn't want to apply it if it's not going to be really effective.
Of course not.
Is it due to the speed? Like, are people speeding or?
I mean, I think if you notice on dirt roads, obviously when it's
Yeah.
drier conditions it
Right.
is, but the faster vehicles are going, the more
The more
dust
it
they're
kicks
gonna
up.
kick up. Yep,
That might be something you just mentioned to Anthony. We had a complaint. and
Right.
Just let him know.
right. Yeah.
So is
The
that,
chief.
is that a possibility to, since the town owns the road, to do some
usually dirt roads do it themselves.
Right, but
So-
apparently it's not,
Yeah.
it's not
I
working
don't,
for them.
I mean, before we would do that, I would have the chief, Anthony, tell us which roads are the real speed issue ones and are there traffic calming, methods he would recommend, rather than us saying, let's put a speed bump in.
Oh,
I'm sure Mike Ant-
absolutely.
yeah.
I just
Yeah.
want to do something to address her concerns. They seem valid.
Yep. All right, next item on the agenda is an interview for possibly the Forest Committee for Tom Morinson, yes. Marinson.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So we have your packet, and I guess you could come up, and you've got some backing with you, yeah.
Support section.
And the material that, that I saw in the packet anyway shows that you're really curious about the committee, you've attended a couple meetings, and you've fallen in love with the town forest, I guess. So whatever else you could tell us in case anybody else has any questions.
Yeah, I mean, we lived here in Hinesburg for it'll be 19 years in November. And I guess over the last, 2 to 3 years, we've started hiking in the forest almost on a daily basis, and went to one of the forest walks, and, Pat mentioned that there was an opening, and so as I've told them as well, I don't know what my qualifications are with it, but if there's anything I can do on the committee, I do have a love for the forest, and I find it really interesting, and so but I don't have any sort of background in forestry or anything, but
I mean, but you have some people on the committee that have quite background,
Yeah.
so.
And that's what we have a county forester for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
yeah,
An excellent county forester.
yeah.
Any-
Well, I would simply say, thank you, as is always the case when anybody comes before us and says they want to give up some of the most valuable resources that they have, which is, of course, their time, right?
Yeah,
None of this works if we don't have
yeah,
folks, qualified, and by qualified, I mean you're interested, right?
Yeah.
And there's true appreciation and love for what you want to steward, and that right there is the key, right? And to say that you don't have any particular skills or anything that you could bring to the committee, probably I could be told or convinced otherwise that
Yeah.
there is something that either is going to come out pretty quickly, or you will develop. You've gone to a couple meetings. Your question interview paperwork
Yeah.
is said. So that in and of itself, will serve you well, and to stay curious about it and stay
Yeah.
active in it. And part of the job is sitting in a committee meeting, periodically.
yeah,
But even bigger part of it is being out in the environment,
yeah,
and you have that in spades.
yeah. Totally.
Yeah, so I would say loving the town forest is a very important qualification.
Yeah, I guess it would be bad if I was doing it and I didn't care for the forest at all.
And if you do love it, you'll learn all you need to learn about it.
Yeah.
Because you're interested. So I
Yeah.
just echo what Aaron said. Thank you very much for
Sure.
coming forward.
Absolutely.
And being willing to do this.
Absolutely.
Tom's
And-
been at 2 or 3 of our meetings where we've had some pretty heavy-duty discussions and had to digest a lot of information. And
Yeah.
he's participated in the discussion. Yeah, really good.
And
Yeah,
it's,
I feel like I've already learned a lot about, I had no idea of what they go into, but, just like working with hunters and all the invasive abatement and all that sort of thing I just found it really interesting, and so,
yeah, there's a number of sides to,
Yeah.
that need to be weighed in,
Yeah.
I love the fact that, you know, your introduction was a outreach educational event.
Yeah.
And the Forest Committee's been doing quite a bit of that.
Yeah.
So, doing a great job.
Yeah, and I like that. I like and in fact, today my wife and I were up hiking and we met a new resident of Hinesburg. They just moved here about a month ago. And he was standing there with a map and going, where am I? Right now. So it's just, you know, it's fun to be in there and meet people and be able to say, oh yeah, take this trail and do this. And, you know, it's you know,
That
we
is
have a great asset with the
Yes.
forests up there, so.
Yeah.
So that right there is a good lesson, right? So a big part of being a part of the committee, being part of the team, being a part of the town municipal team is to be an advocate for
Yeah.
the specialty in which you're choosing to stand for.
Yeah,
And in doing so, whether you're on the trail or in a meeting or in your association of your circle of influence, people you know,
Yeah.
friends, colleagues, there is somebody in there who also is new and has never served before
Yeah.
in a volunteer or elected position that you haven't identified yet but will, and that's also a big part of
Yeah.
what everybody does.
yeah,
So be thinking about that as you engage with the people in your life
okay.
here in town.
We
Bring
are
them
about to
forward.
have one more opening.
You do what?
We
Oh,
are
you
about
have
to have one more
one more.
opening.
See, and there's an opportunity right there.
That's right. There's another.
So I would make a motion to appoint Tom Marinson for the Forest Committee. And the term would be until January 1st, 2023, because the one he was taking was going to be done in 2000, so we thought we might as well just, you know, roll it right over and go till January 2023. Does
Okay.
that sound okay?
Yep.
23, 1/1/23.
1/1/23,
I'll
yeah?
second.
All right, any more discussion?
Yes, as a point of order, the position that you're taking, whose role?
Stuart.
Stuart. I assumed it was Stuart, but I
Yeah.
wanted to ask. Yep, very
So-
good.
So his would have ended on 1/1/20.
1/1/20.
Yep.
Yep. That was my question.
Any other discussion? Pat, you're getting a good,
Yeah.
got a good crew,
This is doing a good job for us.
professional recruiter. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, so that motion passed. Congratulations, and thanks again from
Yeah, sure,
everybody.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
You
good.
need to come back next week and name 5 plants outside.
Yeah.
There'll be a quiz.
Maple?
Three of which must be amazing.
Take a peach on your way out.
Oh,
There you
wow.
go.
Nice. Where are
And
these
Pat, you can
from?
get one.
The town forest.
Oh, yeah.
Kidding.
I haven't run into these yet. I thought these were invasives.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Select
Yep.
Board, for all you're doing, Renee.
You can take a peach, Pat, if you want.
Not good.
Next item on the agenda is the primary one for tonight, wastewater upgrade presentation by Wayne, Elliot, by Aldrich and Elliot. And Eric, you're going to be part of this, I take it, or you're supporting?
Yep.
We have a PowerPoint presentation.
How can you go wrong?
The town, yeah, get your snacks. So the town was required to get a new wastewater permit from the state. I think about there was about a process that took months to finally get through. We've had it for maybe a year or so, and the new permit requirements, conditions, changed the phosphorus and added an ammonia limit, which we were advised that our existing lagoon system would not work. So we've been looking at a complete redesign. Wayne, do you want to give us the?
Sure.
I did invite our representatives via email. I didn't get any response from any of them. So David Zuckerman, Bill Lippert, and Mike
Mike and,
Mike
Mike.
from, who has mostly Charlotte, but a little tiny bit of Hinesburg. Yachenka? Something like that.
Yes.
So I will follow up with them. I was hoping they might be here, but I will
think,
follow up with them
David
because
has an event in his farm tonight.
maybe,
Yeah.
yeah. Yep. All right.
enlarge that. Renee, oh, whoops.
Throw it in
Yeah.
the slideshow.
I wonder if, would you,
You can do it as a PDF.
yeah, do you shut the lights off? and all that?
Yeah.
Sure.
Maybe just, okay, that should be fine.
Popcorn too?
Okay, so good evening. Do you want to ask questions as we go here, or what do
I
you want to do?
think so.
Okay, a lot of stuff here, so yeah.
Yeah, I think so. What do you guys think?
I think so too, because
This is our chance.
in the context of what we're looking at, I think it'll flow,
Yep.
the continuity of the thought.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there's quite a few slides here. We're going to try to keep this to, 20 minutes or so, but there's
Okay.
a lot of information here. So I thought I would start with just to kind of give, oops,
Just go this way, I think it's easier.
is that? Yep. So I thought I would just start here to kind of give everybody a lay of the land about what you have for existing wastewater infrastructure. Out on 116 here by the fire station is what we call the main
There
pump
you go.
station. Whoops.
Oh, Phil's got it in
Yeah.
presentation mode.
Yeah.
So it looks a little
Yeah.
bigger there.
So up here, so next to the fire station, so all the sewage collected in kind of the village area goes to that main pump station. And then it is pumped in a pipe about 3,300 feet in the westerly direction over here to the existing treatment facility. And of course, to get to the treatment plant, you go down Charlotte Road and, in the westerly direction, you'll see that just up to the north there, about, 3,000 feet out there.
So the sewage pipe goes under the stream there?
Yes, yep, it's buried, yep, the whole
Do
way.
you know
yep.
how deep?
I wouldn't know. That varies. It could be 6 feet, it could be 2 or 3 feet, so, yeah. Yep.
And it's the only inlet to the wastewater treatment
That's
plant,
correct,
right?
that's right, yep.
So everything goes there.
Yep,
and-
and then it's piped over, yeah.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, 4 or 5 years ago, Mr. Clark wanted to put a development back behind his house. And his thought was, well, you got that main going across there, I can just tap into that. It's like, well, no, you can't, because you have to look at the fact that the pump station is really the headworks.
Yeah.
And that's where our flow meter is, so that's,
Plus it's
that
a-
pipe is part of the plant, not part of the collection system.
And it's under pressure.
Yeah,
Being
it's
pumped,
not- it's
so.
not- it's not good
Is
practice.
everything else in the sewage treatment plant all gravity fed to those pumps, or do we have
Everything-
other pumps?
Everything that's owned by the town is. There are, well, except, with one exception, which you actually know. There are 11 private pump stations that pump into our gravity sewer, and then we own one over at the water facility.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so this is the, out from Charlotte Road. This is the existing treatment plant site. It was built back in the late 1960s. You're going to come in from Charlotte Road here. You've got the solar array. The La Platte is up in here. So the flow comes over to the main pump station about here. Then it enters a pipe that comes over to this location. You've got 4 lagoons. You've got 1, 2, 3A, and 3B. So the flow goes through the treatment process in this direction. It goes east, then north, and back to the west. And then it heads out to a disinfection structure where it's chlorinated and dechlorinated and is discharged to the north to the La Platte River. So some history, again, so the treatment plant, main pump station were built back in the late 1960s. The lagoon treatment facility was upgraded to remove phosphorus. That was by far the earliest one in Vermont that was required to do that. So the town's been doing phosphorus removal for many, many years. Most of the treatment plants in Vermont followed quite a bit later than that, starting about 2000 on. Part of that is a aerated lagoon facility really was never intended to do nutrient removal, phosphorus or nitrogen, ammonia. The aerated lagoons were built back in the 60s because there was land area available. They were very inexpensive to operate. They didn't take a whole lot of staff attention. If that area, they were pretty easy to build and construct, and they weren't that complex as to some of the other treatment plants that are out there. Then back in 2009, hitting the age-related, some parts of the plant were approaching, 40 years, other parts almost 20 years. So the town initiated a study back in 2007, 2008 to look at the age-related issues. At that time, it appeared they needed additional treatment capacity, so they wanted to go from 250,000 gallons up to 308,000 gallons per day. Midway into that, the Saputo fire occurred, and so that created, really kind of dropped the need to increase the permitted capacity at the time. But the town, looking forward, even though the permit wasn't increased to the 308,000 gallons per day, many of the components in the lagoon were built to meet that 308,000 gallon per day capacity. For example, the aeration system, the blowers, the pumps at the main pump station. So that was still built into the project.
So the main pumps here could
That's
do
correct.
that.
Yep.
And is the 308 based on what we thought we might need, or was it based on how much the maximum we could discharge to the La Platte?
Boy, I should remember that, Phil. I can't remember how that number
'Cause it seems like a
arrived
funny
at.
odd
Yeah, it
number.
was an odd number, and I can't recall if it was a limitation of something we had there. I'm guessing it was probably kind of a capacity limitation for either the pump station or the treatment plant, because it's a
Okay.
little bit of an odd kind of
Yeah.
arbitrary number.
I guess to follow up on that question, so that's 58,000 gallons difference, so if you put in a different pump, make that bigger number, assuming you could get permitted for it? Or is it some other limitation? I guess that's what you don't
I
know.
can't remember. I
Yeah.
know Rocky was there at the time, and, this stuff goes back 12 years. I was there, I worked on it. I honestly, I can't, I could go back and check the records, but I can't recall how the 308, it may have been developed, based on what the town thought they needed over the next 20 years too. And of course, at the time, Saputo owned 50% of the treatment capacity, so
Right.
they used up a big chunk of it, and I'm guessing it was probably, that was partially to do what the town thought they needed for additional capacity over the next, 20-plus years.
Yep.
If we go back one slide,
Yep.
I think it says MGD on the, because it's point.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, okay.
Yep.
Never mind. All right.
So a little bit of background. So in 2018, as Phil mentioned, the town, I'll get into a little bit more of the needs, some of the details on the discharge permit, but town received a new discharge permit, which was primarily driven by the Lake Champlain phosphorus TMDL. So the town went out to a request for qualifications for consultants as a requirement of the state Clean Water SRF program. Once the town does that, 50% of the engineering costs qualify for loan subsidy. So that's a great benefit kind of moving forward on the funding side. We were selected in July of 2018. I think you went through an interview. We were selected, put the engineering agreement together, and we started the preliminary engineering in September of last year. The other thing that was really unique about this project is the town has been very active throughout, over the last roughly a year now. There were several members, staff, select board members, state representatives that were part of this working group. So that was established, and I'm guessing we probably met 6 or 8 times at least, plus the wastewater treatment plant visit. So several people have been involved right from the beginning through the whole process, and a lot of the, we did a binder, and everybody kind of took their binders and learned about wastewater treatment. And,
you go.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of good dialogue. So what's really important about this whole process, it was a kind of a collective process here. It wasn't our recommendation. It was, to me, it's really a collaborative. It's really the town's project and overall the town's recommendation at this point, So the purpose and need, the state issued a new discharge permit on March 1st, 2018. The big driver was the reduction in the phosphorus. That's about a 75% reduction in the phosphorus load. The existing lagoon facility cannot meet that requirement, if it was operating close to the 250,000 gallon per day capacity. The 152 pounds is based on a concentration of 0.2 milligrams per liter at the
We're
permitted
at
cube.
0.8 now, is that?
Yeah,
something?
yeah.
Yeah, that's what our limit is.
Yeah.
And, sorry to interrupt, what would it be if we didn't do any treatment?
If you didn't do any
how
treatment at
much
all, like
phosphorus
no
would-
chemical at all?
Yeah, I'm just curious how much you start with.
Typically 5 or 6 coming in, milligrams per liter. And you're probably just with what you could maybe get it down to 50% to roughly 3, but then you've got to add the chemicals to get it down
Yeah.
below into the 0.8 milligrams per liter. And then you've got to do other treatment components, really tertiary, to get it down into the 0.2
So
consistently.
it's now 0.8, and I think we've had one violation in the last couple of years, maybe two,
I had one this past March.
for, due to a increase in flow,
It
or,
was just funky winter weather. And, yeah, it was a very odd winter. And
If-
the turnover happened early,
yeah, if we, okay, because it turned over from the
the temperatures.
temperature inversion kind of a thing. If we were to stay at 0.8, would there be any concern on your part, Eric, of continuing to maintain 0.8?
No, for the most part, I mean,
As the flows increase,
the
though. for
flows
the new
increase.
development.
You might reach that mass balance of 6.
I think with some of the stuff we're doing on the upstream side now with more tightly scrutinizing our industrial users, I think that we could do it. But unfortunately, that's just not
Right.
reality.
I'm just pointing out that
Right.
we've been maintaining our permit at where it is now, 0.8. Okay.
Yep.
So the other thing that Hinesburg got hit with, which is a bit unique and has to do with the size of the receiving water, La Platte, is that there's some water quality-based limitations primarily for ammonia. So there's a summer limit of 3.5 milligrams per liter, and if we go back over the last 3 years, the majority of the months, the facility couldn't get down under that 3.5 milligram per liter limit consistently. The limit is higher in the winter because of the colder temperatures, so there's some flexibility there. But basically, the existing lagoon facility can't get down under that 3.5 milligram per liter limit consistently.
And we don't do anything specifically
No,
to do it.
no.
Is it higher when it comes in, and is
Oh,
it
yeah.
dissipate over,
Yep.
just because of the
Yep.
open lagoon?
Yep.
Or is it,
So the-
volatile?
Yep, so the ammonia coming into the plant is probably about 25 milligrams per liter. So you do get some nitrification occurring, but again, a lagoon facility wasn't really designed or intended to remove ammonia, to any extent, just as we've talked about the phosphorus, so, yep. So in the discharge permit, there was a compliance schedule that required a plan that was due by February 28, 2019. There was a document submitted on that, but it wasn't complete, and that primarily had to do with the geotechnical issues that were encountered, as we'll talk about a little bit later. The other thing that came out of this is that once you hit 80% of your 250,000 gallon per day capacity, you do need to start planning for the next expansion. So the town wanted to understand, how far you could go with the additional capacity, what you needed, what are the options to stay where you are now versus expanding the facility. And the last one part of this, I thought this was important to add, is you've got a lot of new kind of industrial users in town. The breweries, distilleries, food processing are very popular around Vermont. That creates a significantly increased higher strength wastewater that's going to these treatment plants. And again, the lagoons really weren't intended to take that, so the strength of the wastewater, particularly from those customers, is much higher than it is from all the other existing customers in the town. Just some photos of what your existing infrastructure. This is the main pump station that's out on 116. The pumps are below grade, about, probably 20 feet or so. This is just an emergency generator. You do need to provide, continuous operation of this pumping facility during a power outage. These are photos of your existing lagoons. They basically look like ponds. Again, there's 4 of them. The water level is about 10 feet deep. These were constructed back in the late 60s, and they do have what we call a bentonite clay liner, which isn't the type of liner that would be used or required today. It would generally be a synthetic liner. So the liner in those ponds, which is intended to be impermeable, is now, 50 plus years old. The volume of those is about 18 million gallons between the 4 ponds. One of the benefits, the town does have more volume that you need to, and now I think about it, that may be where the 308 came from, because
the
they
volume
were
of the-
sized, yep, so I think that may be the kind of the criteria. That allows us more flexibility to construction, from a sequence of things, so that just gives us some,
So you said the clay liners are 50-plus years old.
Yep.
But are you suggesting that they're in need of repair or
For
replacement?
one of the options we looked at, we did include the replacement of the liners in there, so that is part of that cost, because we got concerns about, using that clay liner moving forward, in a couple of the lagoons for another 20-plus years, yeah.
I even doubt the state would approve it
Without redoing the
without
line.
the synthetic liner.
So again, the town has been doing phosphorus removal here since the late or early 1990s. The majority of the phosphorus settles out with the sludge here, which this is the fourth lagoon, which we call 3B. So chemicals added, it settles out prior to discharge to the disinfection facility. This is the disinfection. You get basically a chlorine contact tank. Chlorine is added to kill the E. coli, and then another chemical is added for dechlorin, again, because of the smaller size of the La Platte, the receiving water. So this is a summary of the table, just to give you a snapshot of what your existing flows are. And one thing that's very important, so this table goes back to July of 2018, and this is where we started the study. So this was really used as the basis of what we looked at for where you are at for existing flows and what you potentially need moving forward. So these numbers are going to change every year. So the select board approves their Appendix C every year. So the unconnected residential enterprise flows shown there, those are going to be changing a little bit every year. The other thing the town does as part of the Appendix E is you just use a 12-month annual flow. Here we're showing the prior 3 years, kind of the historical average. This number does go up and down a little bit every year, depends on weather. It's really driven by the wet weather, how much rain we have, so that will go up. So again, what's important here is once you start approaching 80%, which is 200,000, then that's really the trigger where you need to start planning or needing, future capacity moving forward. We spent a lot of time talking about what the town needs over the next 20 years. There were Alex and everybody provided information on, 5 or 6 potential pending developments out there and what they're going to possibly need. We also included some other allowances in there for things that we just don't know that may happen in 10, 12, 15 years. So we projected about 135,000 gallons per day needed of additional flow. So this is really adding up your actual flows, what's been committed but not unconnected, and what you need over the next 20 years. So that's where we came up to the 325,000 gallons per day.
I got a quick question
Sure.
on the estimate, since this was
Yep.
a year ago.
Yep.
So I know Alex has a good handle on all the developments that were
Yep.
proposed at the time. I'm just wondering if some of the new larger ones, like the Quinn property and stuff, if those get built out, those aren't, insignificant sized development
Yep.
requests. So I'm wondering if it would actually be larger than this.
No,
That was taken into account.
So what would happen, so that, for example, the Quinn is included in this number
It
right
is.
now, yeah.
Okay, good.
So once they're approved, then, and as you have units start to connect, what's gonna happen is some of that flow is then gonna end up in here because it's gonna be part of the actual flow. And then you're gonna have the portion that's, approved but unconnected is gonna slide back up into here. So over time, you would see this number, start to decrease.
Okay.
Yep.
I think generally we thought, going into this project, I think we really looked at cost, but then said, geez, if the cost isn't significant, isn't to have additional capacity is not a huge adder or a significant adder, let's
Yep.
just look at that and see. And I think a couple of the different designs, it did have an adder or it didn't.
Yep. Okay, so these are the 3 treatment alternatives we evaluated, and we're going to get in a little bit more detail, but so this was a little bit of a unique process here, and so number 1 was really looked at as a lagoon upgrade to see what we could do there to comply with the new effluent permit limits going forward. However, this number 1 stated your current permitted capacity. And then we looked at 2 and 3, which are basically brand new treatment processes. And in those cases, we'd permit those for a capacity of 325,000 gallons per day. And there's a couple things that town wanted to understand here is, was there any increase, additional cost to go from the 250,000 to the 325,000 gallon per day, and what that was, or was it just as cheap or less expensive to build this in to begin with versus trying to upgrade the existing lagoon facility that you have now. So this is the first one that we evaluated. I'm not going to get a ton of detail here. We could talk about an hour here just on the process side, but to give you a general idea, the approach here is to really build the new treatment system in the lagoon, or start with in Lagoon 1. In the case here, we've got a new headworks. We need to provide screening, to get out the inorganic plastics. And in this case, we weren't going to reuse the majority of the existing lagoons. We didn't need that volume because you can reduce the volume of that. And by doing things in the existing lagoon area here, you can optimize and get better treatment than what you are now. And we do need to get a higher degree of treatment here moving forward to be able to consistently comply.
So it's a lot more active
That's
treatment
correct, that's right.
versus just
Yep.
slowly going
Passive,
through the
yep.
lagoons and a
Passive,
little
more
flocculation
biological,
at the
yep.
end. This is like,
Yep.
you're really going at it
This is
with different stuff.
significantly smaller footprint.
That's correct, yeah.
Significantly.
So in this case, what we were planning on doing is once the sludge is out of these lagoons, is we're just gonna blend this back in, so that would become floodplain. The other thing we were trying to.
Soccer fields.
Soccer field.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. There's been a lot of issues more recently with regulatory floodway, and so we really tried to stay out of these lower areas as much as we could. I mean, there's just a lot more focus on flood resiliency and floodway, so that's the reason we were trying to build up top here. The state did require that we have 2 lagoons, so we had to add this feature into the project cost, so you would have kind of 2 parallel trains for redundancy purpose. This is where some of the settling occurs out. Then we're looking at a brand new structure over here that would have what we call a polishing reactor to get the ammonia removal, and then it would have a ballasted flocculation system. So this is a really large, pretty significant process structure. And after that, the ammonia, the phosphorus removed, that's going to continue out and reuse the existing disinfection system. We also have a brand new control building on the site, so pretty significant upgrade work here. And so this one would stay at the 250,000 gallon per day capacity.
When you look at something like that, how long do you give it for a lifespan? Is it a
That right there?
100-year project? 50 years? Be done in 20 years?
It depends. Most of the process equipment, electrical on that, we're going to say is going to be 25 to 30 years.
Yeah.
The structural improvements, obviously the building foundation, the tanks, those kind of things have a 50-plus year life. A lot of the buried piping, those kind of things are going to have more than a 30-year life. So it's
Can you at all project the technology of it all? So here's a lagoon that was built in the 60s, and
Yeah.
still serving us
Yeah.
well into the 2000s.
Yeah.
Are we saying the same thing about what this is being?
Well, the chemistry
What
would be
about
the
the cover?
same.
Yeah, oh yeah, yep, so there's a cover in here, yep, these lagoons are covered, and there's a couple reasons for that, is that's basically to hold up and keep the wastewater temperatures up, especially in the warmer months, so you can
Keep
get.
it more active.
Yep,
Yeah.
and so you can help to comply with get the ammonia removal, yep. So that's also a big part of the cost. So here, we're looking at brand new liners for the lagoons, and these lagoons all have a floating cover, and as good point with Eric, so the floating cover's probably got a 25-year life. That's something that would have to be replaced at some point in time.
Do you have an estimate, or maybe you're gonna go with, say, just a cost of ownership of running this thing?
Oh, sure, yep,
Every
yeah,
year
we
or
got all,
whatever?
yep,
Okay.
we got all that, yep. So this is alternative number 2. So this gets you 325,000 gallons per day. Got a similar headwork structure. All the biological treatment and the clarification happens in these 2 sequential batch reactor tanks. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail process-wise, kind of just give you an idea of what we have here for components. Again, we're trying to build this in this lagoon number 1 and take advantage of the space and the higher elevation. We do have flow equalization, so we pump out of this. And then what we do is we go into a filtration system, again, to get the phosphorus removal. We have ultraviolet disinfection in here, and then from there, it's really discharged. So we're not going to use the liquid out here anymore. It would be discharged directly to the La Platte from there. We also have a new control building, so the footprint of this whole thing is relatively small compared to the, alternative number one. Again, the lagoons would just be abandoned and graded and kind of blended back into the existing floodway. So this is pretty similar to number two, but we wanted to look at a little variation on the treatment process. Headworks are the same as number two. Basically, the functions in the sequential batch reactor tanks that happen, the biological treatment and clarification. So what's happening here is this is done in separate tanks. We have two separate aeration tanks is where the biological treatment occurs. Then we have two new secondary clarifiers is where the clarification occurs. That's where part of the phosphorus is removed. And then this structure with the cloth media filtration, the disinfection is similar to number two, and the control building is similar to number two. So you can see what happens here. You have more tankage, more footprint than you have number two, so there's more capital costs involved, and they're both very similar in how they operate and perform. So one of the things we did out of this, which we really try to do, is get out and look at some existing wastewater plants. And so the working group was very active with that. We tried to, fortunately, we had a lot of this stuff within a reasonable driving distance, so we didn't get out of Vermont. But it's important to get down there. Facilities have operated for, a few years, to talk to the operators, the staff, see what they like, see how things are going. This is a picture of Waterbury, Vermont, which is the ballasted flocks. So this is kind of what would look like in that new building under alternative number one behind the lagoons. So we went to Waterbury. They have lagoons. They have the ballasted flocculation, which is included in alternative number one. We also went to Hartford, which is the Queechee plant. They have two sequential batch reactors, tertiary filtration, headworks, ultraviolet disinfection. So this is very similar to alternative number two. And then we went to Bartlett's Bay over here. This is a bigger size than what you would have here, but they have the AO process, which we see in alternative number three, which is the biological part of the treatment process. They also have the secondary clarifiers, the tertiary filtration, and the ultraviolet disinfection. So I think this was very valuable just to kind of touch and see this stuff, and kind of for everybody to get a little better understanding of what we're looking for. So as we got into this midwinter, we started to look at and be concerned a little about some of the geotechnical out there at the site. So we got the state to approve doing some, and this is pretty rare to do this work as part of this phase of the project. And I guess where we are today, I'm really glad we did, because if we went forward and we didn't really know what we were dealing with or understand what we had there, this was a significant cost, as you see, that wouldn't have been wrapped into, incorporated in the project. And in fact, we had to make quite a few changes in the layout of things here to accommodate, how we're going to do the subgrade improvements moving forward. So this is a copy of the boring log here. It's a little bit hard to read, but if you look at this one didn't go quite as deep, but from about 35, so basically all they do is they sit up on the ground, they drive, down, and they take a sample every 5 feet. They get down to about 35 feet, and it's a very, very soft gray clay, and one of the worst I've ever seen. Really can't support anything at all, and pretty much zero blow counts. And then they did get down to refusal at about 70 feet, which is important. Then what they do is they take that clay and they do consolidation testing, and they figure that could compress maybe 3 to 3.5 feet, which isn't something you want to build something out there and find that everything's going to move or consolidate over time. And depending on the layout and the tanks and all that stuff, they anticipated or projected that you could have 18 to 42 inches of settlement over the next 50 years. So that's not good, because
Not entirely out of, like, that, to be expected, I guess.
No, they really can't. You can't build like large
Yeah,
tank structures of that kind of weight.
That's what I'm saying, is
Oh.
like, to do this test and find
Oh,
these
yeah,
results,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I would assume nobody in this room is surprised. Yeah?
Well, I think we expected it might be problematic,
We
but
could,
it's
yeah,
far
yeah,
worse
yep.
than typical.
No, I would say that. I don't think there was in the past, I don't think there's been a whole lot of soils investigation done in that site. When we get into other treatment plant sites, you can pretty quickly say that, it was built on a landfill, so there's steel piles, there's indicators that kind of jump out, but
Yeah.
I don't think there's been a whole lot of soils work investigation done at this site. I'm not sure it was a surprise, I guess. I think the extent or the, how bad it was
Yeah.
worse than what we expected. But it's better to know this now than, a year or two down the road,
Oh,
so it
for
can be
That's
addressed.
because it's a floodplain, right?
No, it isn't. It's just, it's just the native, the soil types out there, yeah. And that, we found, by just getting more information, that also comes this way east into the village. And there were issues with a silo that Saputo did a few years ago that started to tilt and settle, and,
Lucky us.
yeah, so,
So we're gonna play right here in
Yep.
town.
Yeah, potentially.
yeah.
That's why this
But I
half of the
think-
building is shifting
So some
down,
of it
too.
has- some of it
You've
has
seen
to-
the addition here.
Function of how heavy the structures are too. Smaller structure probably would never be an issue or concern. We're putting some pretty large structures in, and we're in the ground a ways, so just the weight, they're full of water, so that's really the big concern. It's likely that, the lagoons have settled out there over the years, some. It's hard to see, you don't see it, maybe it's kind of dropped down uniformly, but the concern moving forward is that, the entire fill area would settle, and what does that mean for pipes, and pipes breaking, and electrical conduits, and all those other things that go along with it, so. So we basically, our geotechnical engineer looked at a couple subgrade improvements, and there's a couple different types that are out there that can be done. The first one is wick drains, not done too commonly up in here because we don't get into these soil types all that frequently. But you can see up in the right, that's really what the wick drains are. And what they do is it's a PVC sleeve, almost an under drain that they just put vertically in the ground, and it's installed at a 3-foot grid or larger. And what it does is it pulls the water out, and over time, over a period of time, it accelerates that settlement. So what you're trying to do is take that settlement that could occur in 50 years and have it 95% of it, the majority happen in a year or less than that, 10 months. So that technology is really popular down in areas of Texas, and is done on a pretty large scale with private developments, commercial developments, those kind of things. The other option is to put all the new tanks and structures on steel piles, which you can see here. And in that case, you're just putting the piles under the tanks in the buildings, which are going to be fixed and
down to
to
70 feet or
refusal. That's
whatever.
correct. Yep. So you drive those down to refusal, and then you pour the mat foundation. You build up from there. So in that case, only the new structures would be fixed down to the refusal. So the subgrade improvements are pretty costly. We worked pretty closely with our geotechnical engineer and had to tweak the layouts. We, looked at consolidating some of these structures to make,
shrinking the structure, so you
that's right.
treat less area.
Going deeper, larger footprint. So one of the things we did here at this point is we did drop the alternative number 3 from the cost and assessment moving forward. And part of that is you had 2 new structures. So when you're looking at the subgrade improvements, it just kind of threw that one out as being more expensive. But we had to look at the subgrade improvements for each of the treatment alternatives. So number 1 here, which is the existing lagoons. This one is less because, again, part of that was we were going to reuse the existing area lagoons. So we're looking at $690,000 to $732,000 for the estimated construction costs. Treatment alternative number 2, which is all the new tanks, that's quite a bit more, 1.6 to 1.4 million. And the reason for that is we had to do a lot larger area, especially for the wick drains. Yep.
Well,
So what we did here when we looked at the estimated construction costs is we kind of presented these separately. These are the tables right out of the report. So if we're looking at treatment alternative number 1, that's the lagoon upgrades with the lemna, the ballasted flock. So if we're just looking at the treatment portion expansion, we're almost at $8 million. The wick drains, so the preference really for the subgrade improvements we decided was to move forward with the wick drains. There's a bunch of reasons for that. It was a little bit easier to do. We could preload the area, and the entire fill area would settle, whereas again, if we just went with the piles, you're only fixing the structure, you're not really dealing with the pipes and electrical conduits and everything between. So we felt it was better to get the whole area to settle uniformly. So estimated construction costs, now these are just in current day costs, so we're looking at about 8.7 million. Alternative number 2, again, with this option, construction cost here is 6.7 million. The wick drains are a little more expensive, but when we total this up, this alternative is still less costly than number 1. The other thing to remember with number 2 is you're getting another 75,000 gallons per day of capacity. So to stay at your current capacity and just go with the lagoon upgrades is still more expensive from a construction cost standpoint.
So those wick fans, so you put them in and it pulls the water out 90% or some number over the course of a year.
That's right, yep.
And then do they come back out or do they get replaced in?
Just
or
leave, probably just leave.
Just leave them there
yeah,
and,
yep.
and then you're done, but like, doesn't more, what you're pulling out is the moisture, doesn't
what-
that just sort of seep back in and eventually
Yeah.
you have the same problem again?
What you do is once
Do
you
like
get them
50
in, you fill and preload that whole area at least up to or higher than what you think your proposed grade's gonna be. And what you're doing is you're monitoring that settlement over that period of 10 or 12 months. And what happens is it really accelerates pretty quickly. So you're kind of plotting that out. But after you get to like the 10 or 12 months, it flattens out. You have the majority of that settlement really occurs relatively quickly.
But 20 years from now though, doesn't
But
that
it's
water?
really minor. The majority of the settlement's already occurred, so you're getting that in that period of time. And it's a pretty steep curve here where a lot of it happens very quickly, and then you see it's relatively flat, so you just don't get much more.
It's like you squished it all down.
That's right,
Yeah.
yeah,
That
exactly.
was
yeah.
solid.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right, yep.
Once you've gotten rid of that inner particle space, it's gone.
Meaning that even if water wanted to get in, there's no place for it to go.
Yeah.
is
Well,
what
it's
you're
also
saying.
the preload, it's the weight of
And you're
everything
pushing
up
it down
top.
and
That's right.
keeping it
That's a good
compressed.
example, is really what you're doing, is you're pushing it down, you're pulling the
Compressing
water
it,
out,
getting
you're
rid of the
pushing it
space.
down, that's right, yep, yep.
Well, that's pretty clever, pretty simple principle.
So this is really just for informational purposes, and again, we didn't do number 3. So the state requires, when you're looking at these options, you look at the monetary, non-monetary. So number 2, from a construction cost, is less expensive. They also make sure that we look at the present worth analysis. So this is what the projected annual operating costs for each of the options are. So number 2 is going to be $450,000 a year. So we take this account and come up with a total present worth, and that's another way of evaluating the option. So we have to use that as the basis of selection. You could have an option that has a lower construction cost but is less expensive to operate. So after you did this analysis, it could show that number 1 was the preferred approach versus number 2. But in this case, number 2 happens to have the least construction cost and also the lowest operating costs, so it's got a lower present worth of 15.8 million. So a couple other things I did want to mention, because, we did, when we go to the geotechnical issues, we did have some discussion about this to see if there are other things we should be looking at. And one of the things we did work on early on is working with the state on the ammonia limit. And really what this would mean is if we could get the outfall downstream far enough, maybe the ammonia limit would increase to a point by the stream having more flow that we could maybe avoid some of the costs to comply with the lower ammonia limit. And they took it quite a ways down, and it just didn't drop that enough to really be useful or beneficial or gain anything out of it. Then we had to balance the costs of piping the effluent 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet. So we had to weigh that cost of any savings we could reap at the treatment plant site. And the other thing we did talk about too is if there's any other sites, to avoid the geotechnical issues. And kind of the discussion as you come back towards the village in the east, you're still going to be in the clays anyways. It may be a little bit less. Then you're into purchasing property, could be odor control issues, operational issues as you get closer to the village. And then the other thing is we would probably still have to run the outfall, the effluent back in that direction, the 2,000 feet to where it is now. So didn't really come up with anything there that we thought would be a significant savings or
Didn't appear to
benefit.
be
No.
any property even that we thought could even be explored. And like you say, there's no real, as you move it, it adds more problems.
So this is what the proposed project is going to look like, and there's some changes from what you saw before. One of the things that came out of this is that the town wants to keep this existing sludge lagoon in service during the construction, so we moved everything really into lagoon number 1. So what happens here is the work has to be done in 2 phases. So this is really just doing the wick drains and the fill and the earthwork as part of phase 1. Again, this is to get this settlement to occur, so this work's going to be done, and everything's going to just sit for about 10 to 12 months before the work on the new treatment plant can start. And the dash lines you see are really just the outlines of the new structures, and we need to stay away from the toe of the existing slope here and do a big enough area so we can get everything to, settle and consolidate uniformly. So the proposed project, just to some of the elements to give you an idea what's in there, we do need to upgrade the main pump station as far as increasing the capacity slightly. There's the new headworks for screening. This is an example of what a rotary screen would do, and what that does is, again, it takes the plastics, the inorganics out of the flow stream. It keeps it from going through the biological process, the sludge, all the way down, and what it does is it pulls it out of there, dewaters it, and that material goes in a dumpster for separate disposal. This is a large-scale sequential batch reactor system, but you would have 2 tanks that would look about like this, that would be square. There would be another tank in the middle here that would be smaller, and then there's a post-equalization tank at the back. This gives you an idea what the filters could look like. This is the cloth media filter. Then we'd have the chemical feed storage systems, ultraviolet disinfection. We would reuse the existing chlorine contact tank for processed water. So what we're trying to do there is take the treated effluent and use it around the plant for other purposes versus using the potable water from a kind of a just good environmental conscious friendly method. We need 2 sludge storage tanks. You wouldn't have sludge storage dewatering on site. That's going to have to be trucked to another local facility for dewatering and disposal. New control building and plant pump station. Emergency generator. Again, the facility needs to stay operable during a power outage, and then we would abandon the existing lagoons. This is generally phase 2 here, so this is lagoon number 1. Ultimately, the sludge storage lagoon here would come out of service, so the flow would be pumped. We'd have the new headworks, would have the screen as we just looked at, the 2 SBR tanks. This new structure here would contain the filters, the filter you saw, the blue cloth media you saw in the previous picture, the ultraviolet disinfection. We would have the 2 sludge storage tanks, and we'd have a new control building here. So those could get shifted around a little bit, but generally are going to stay within that area. And we don't want to fill any more of this lagoon than we have to, because, as we continue to move out into these areas, that's more money. That's a lot of fill that would need to bring in. So
So I get the wick drain system, you're
Yep,
gonna
yep,
settle it
yep,
down, and I
yep.
think you said it, over 50 years, about 42 inches,
Yep,
3.5
yep.
feet. So is there a concern, it sounds like this is gonna drop lower than the current lagoons, even if by 3 feet, but,
Nope. So
you know what I mean? How's that work?
Yep, so what happened as part of this phase 1 is the wick drains would be installed on that 3-foot grid throughout this whole area. And then what we would do is we would fill this area, preload it up to, or at least higher than the top of those existing lagoons. So all that material's there. It's part of that is that weight that's pushing down on that helps that settlement occur. Then what we would do as part of this phase is we need to dig that material back out here in some of these areas, and this is going to vary a little bit by depth, but we're going to have to dig that material back out here so we can build a foundation for the control building or build the SBR tanks. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah. So
okay, right, yep.
when all is said and done, it comes about.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. If anything, the grade out here is going to be a little bit higher probably than the top of the lagoons, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
How's the construction process gonna affect our ability to treat what's coming in?
Well, so the benefit of what you have there now is you have more volume than what you need.
Right.
So we have the flexibility to take this, and sometimes we don't, so we have to be pretty careful. Probably what we would do, we would keep the existing aeration blowers all intact, everything here. And what we could do is we have the aeration chains that were put in back in 2009, 2010. We would probably move some of those down just so we could get more air and mixing. We could even move the baffle down to set that up so we can make sure you can operate reliably during the construction process. So, yeah.
We've run without tank 1 before, and there's plenty of volume there.
Yep. So you need to keep everything operable throughout the construction and comply with your discharge permits. That doesn't come online until this is all tested out and, fully operable, everything. Yep.
Is this the kind of thing where, of course, we have to get a license from the state to run it, I would imagine, once
Well-
it's completed?
These guys have licenses.
Right, like, sort of like a certificate of occupancy, like when you build a building.
Yeah, there's a
Sure.
whole process. I mean, we have to
Right.
go through amendment of the discharge permit, and there's all the permits
Is
that
that
we would need.
like an ongoing thing, or is it sort of like that, is that a last address thing, and it's looked at as a whole?
Probably the last address thing, I guess, as far as the permits. I mean, they'll sign off and you're certifying. Part of the reason you've got a buffer in the schedule too is that we can talk a little bit about the deadline, but your deadline is the end of 2022. And we built into that, once this is up and running, is you get some time to operate there for 3 months, 6 months, just to kind of work the bugs out and make sure everything looks good there, before everybody kind of signs off and you can make sure you can comply.
And that deadline, as you're describing here, minus anything we see along the way, is doable. it sounds like.
It's not quite at this point
Not
because of the
quite.
geotechnical stuff, yeah.
The wick
because-
drains add a lot of time.
Yeah,
Years
that adds
worth.
a fair amount of time, so.
Is there any leeway with that compliance date? Yeah.
There was when we met with them, so they wanted to make sure that compliance deadline was in the permit, written in for that 5-year term. They offered that they could provide some flexibility possibly, depending how it goes, and write that into the new permit. Typically, the way that's gonna go, though, as long as the town's moving forward, you're gonna be okay. If you get a positive bond vote, you're moving to construction on the wick drains. Where it's gonna get to be a bit of a challenge is something kind of falls off and you get behind, then that's where they're gonna start, watching it a little more closely.
And therein lies the issue, is we gotta go through a bond vote.
That's right, yep.
What happens if that bond vote?
Well, so there's a couple different ways, and I can tell you, unfortunately, it doesn't happen very often, but I went through one back in the 90s on a CSO project, and we went through 3 of them. The first one didn't pass. We reduced the project scope a little bit, so they had a 1272 order, so they had to do a project. They didn't have a choice. They were having overflows basically anytime it rained. Second one went through and didn't pass, and then the state came in for the third one. They will sometimes issue what they call an assurance of discontinuance, which was an illegal order, which you have to really get back on track. What they did in that case is they actually threatened that the amount of the fines was going to be equal to the increased cost of building the project, so.
What's the cost of doing nothing? Just, not that I'm suggesting that, by the way, let me
it's
go official,
been
but
a lot of-
I like all the options so I know what we're looking at.
Yeah.
They would definitely make sure the fines made it or worse. Building. I mean, it's, EPA is basically, it's EPA, it's not the state. So
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Different variants on compliance.
That's why I love our representatives to be here tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the plan would be to talk with them about this. One, so they understand our position. 2, understand, the important work of cleaning the lake, but how it's impacted, here, a small town, and what benefit we'll get out of it. And number 3, they're right in the process right now, the state, they have a funding method to help clean the lake, and they're making decisions now how they use that money. Do they provide it to towns for stormwater help to reduce phosphorus going in? Do they specifically provide more funds for wastewater treatment plants that are impacted? How are they gonna spend that money? So that's going on right now, those
Yep.
discussions. So that's why I wanna get our representatives here so they can understand it. And, and then, what's that?
Just stay quiet.
Well, part of the
And-
reason or concern is why, people are really cautious, and unfortunately, it's EPA and it's a TMDL, but the wastewater treatment plants contribute about 3.1% of the phosphorus to the lake, and we all know that's right. So how much money, how many millions of dollars do you do to reduce that incremental portion, so.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, I think,
The city is very sympathetic to the
Yeah.
issue and
Let's-
the load that it puts on small municipalities.
Right, that's the catch-22 of it, though, is the state understands where we're at. EPA, all they see is, hey, we've got their permit, we can regulate them, there's hard numbers our bean counters can count. So they go straight after the plants.
I get
The
this.
state, on the other hand, says, okay, we have this money to spend to do as much as we can with the lake. They feel our pain, but they can do more for the lake putting it somewhere else. Because we're such a small load to begin with. So we're kind of caught between the two, opposite forces.
They're just trying to show compliance to the federal regulation, and this is the
Yeah.
easy way to do it.
Yep.
Push it up on the towns, and monitor the wastewater.
Yep.
It's just,
so we'll,
Backwards.
I mean, one way or the other, we'll work toward a bond, and I think we'll, want to present our best foot forward, and the best way to fund that bond, too. I think we'll have some discussions about that. And then I think, we could have a discussion that says, what would be the steps if the bond didn't pass? And before that, we really got to understand how it impacts each and every user.
the economic impact is what I want to know.
Yeah.
Because on an 11.7 bond, assuming we don't get any, how many users are on our system? 210?
No.
Six hundred and, at 629 units. Yeah.
So,
Okay, so I'll jump through these
Yeah.
quickly so we can, so this just shows the construction costs for the WIC drains extended out to a construction date of fall of 2020. So we're up at about, almost 1.5 million. Same thing for the phase 2 for the treatment portion. This is extended out even further because we need to do the WIC drains. They need to sit for 10 or 12 months, and then get into construction. So this one's out at roughly 2022. So we're looking at about, 7.3 million. So when you total all this up, what we do is come up with a total project cost. So that includes the construction. The state requires we carry a 10% construction contingency. So construction costs we've all estimated are based on the anticipated start construction dates. Includes engineering, other costs. You got administration, permit fees, legal, short-term interest. So total, we're looking at about 11.7 million. And that is aligns with the recommended bond amount. So funding sources that are available out there, and this is still a moving target, this is something that we're all having a lot of discussion and continuing to work towards here. So from the state, you've got the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund, so you do qualify, again, for the engineering, roughly up to, you'll see the numbers on the next slide, but 50% of the engineering. You do qualify for a state pollution control grant, and we've estimated that at 16 to 17% of the total costs. Kind of what Phil's referring to, there's this clean water fund you've been reading about a lot. I mean, there was a session on it this morning, and there's a big bucket of money there, and that at this point isn't necessarily allocated or steered to the municipalities for these types of projects. A lot of it's kind of non-regulatory. It's going to the riparian buffer, the ag sector, the non-point stuff. So that's where the local reps kind of really help, to try to maybe see if we can't free some of that money up for this purpose. Their loan term is 20 or 30 year, and again, a majority of this would probably be closer to 30 years. So be looking at that for loan term. It's a 2% interest rate. They call it an administrative fee. We're also looking at USD rural development, which are federal funds. An income survey needs to be done here before we can confirm if the town is eligible for the grant. What that does is they go out and do an income survey of the sewer service area to verify whether the median household income in. If you are eligible, you could get up to a 45% grant, but we're seeing offers of roughly 25%. One of the challenges with USDA is their application is due each December. And they can't give you a formal funding offer until you have a positive bond vote. So if the town is eligible for a grant, we can make some estimates here, but they are going to be estimates moving forward on what we've seen for funding packages for other similar type projects and communities. But those are really the two
And
primaries.
this is one or the other?
No, it could be both.
Okay.
Yep. So there's pretty common to have joint funded projects, and we've got a, $18 million treatment plant upgrade in St. Albans. It's almost done. That was a joint funded project. So this is how the funding could.
How much was it?
18.
18.
Yep.
How much did they get out of the funding, percentage of that 18?
I'd have to go back and double check the numbers, but I'd be glad to provide that. I just don't have those off the top of my head. Yep.
Yeah, it'd just be interesting to see
Yep.
what the
Sure.
average is.
Yep. So one option is the joint, where you could have both state and USDA. Again, we'd have to confirm. You'd really want to make sure you were eligible for the USDA grant when you went in that approach, because if you're not, you're looking at a similar term on the low end and a higher interest rate, so it doesn't really make sense to go with them if you can't get the grant. So we're estimating $300,000 here for the loan subsidy on the engineering. 1.75 roughly for the state pollution control grant. If you're looking at an approximate 25% grant from USDA, you're looking at about $3 million. So of the total here, in this funding option, you're looking at about $5 million of grant money. If you don't go with USDA or can't because of the eligibility of state only here, you're looking at about a little over $2 million here in grant money. The rest of this is going to be loan. This is going to be a 30-year term at the 2% interest rate. But one of the things we've been talking about them with is if it end up as state only, they could maybe get into, there's some things that they could possibly do for the loan subsidy. So at least a large portion or significant portion of that you wouldn't have to pay back. So those are some of the things that, they're really interested in funding this. So those are the things that, are discussions that are ongoing as we move forward here.
Is there, I know, so those discussions are ongoing. Is there anything that the select board or the town could be doing to help support those discussions and opportunities?
Yeah, probably it's a little bit early. I think the income survey is the one thing we want
Yeah.
to get going on, so we can just see where that lands. And then I think depending how that goes, then we can continue the dialogue with the state. So if you're not looking at going to a bond vote in March, you need to have everything pretty well nailed in by middle of January. So we've got some time. If you were looking at November, it's coming up quickly, so
Yeah.
there's some time to work on that stuff. So one of the things we haven't done here, which this is really kind of purposeful, is, we've got numbers, the average sewer user in Hinesburg residential, pays $700 to $750 in sewer right now with the quarterly base fee and the usage. We generally would prefer to have some numbers of what the impacts of the sewer customers are, but we're hesitant to do that at this point for a bunch of reasons because of the uncertainty in moving targets. The income survey is important to see if the town qualifies for a USDA grant. There's a lot of discussions with the state that have started about, the loan subsidy for the loan. So there's some moving targets that we all need to kind of continue to work on so we, get the best funding package, out to the town, and then, we can see what the impacts on the sewer customers are. The other thing that we're going to be looking at too is with the expansion component is having a discussion on some of the other revenue sources. So we're looking at allocation connection fees.
Yeah,
So,
impact fee.
yep,
or-
so the
yeah.
thought there is as some of this new development comes in is that those guys are going to be paying in a good chunk of the debt retirement, moving forward to kind of help the existing sewer base. So there's a lot of pieces in there that need to be worked on as we move
And,
forward.
and your firm has the capability to work through all
Yep,
this?
Yep.
So, do we know, can we anticipate what that number is realistically for the impact?
Yeah, so it's basically just gonna,
And we know the projects, but we don't know
Yeah,
the dates are gonna come online, so
yeah,
we don't know the dates
yeah.
they're gonna, can we anticipate?
yeah, that was
At all?
something the town did back in 2009, 2010. If you look at kind of your historical development pattern here over the last few years, you obviously don't want to stretch that. You probably want to be here conservative. We
Yeah.
don't know where the economy is going to be in 3 or 4 years, but you're going to make some kind of reasonable projection on how quickly that build out's going to occur, and with some estimates on how much revenue you can get out of the allocation connection fees. Yep, to contribute to the debt retirement. Yep.
But we wouldn't know that in anticipation of the bond, or would?
You would want to,
Yeah,
yeah. We
that's what I'm
we
thinking.
fully intend to go through those exercises so we can identify any potential revenue sources.
Yeah.
You know, and I brought this up before, I mean, I think as part of this, we have a discussion about how we go about with this bond vote. And, you know, you have the option of like, all the users, they pay for it, but all the town votes for it. You know, or it could be, you say, no, the entire town's gonna pay for it, probably wouldn't pass, but, or maybe it's, somewhere in between. And, you know, I sort of say that you could make an argument that, I don't know, just throw out 10% is shared by the entire town and the remainder by the users. Since the entire town benefits some from having this system in place and having our schools and commercial district and whatnot. But, you know, that's a discussion we can have, obviously, and we'll get input from people.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the economy of the town. You know, because rough back of the napkin math, not taking into account interest rates, at 11.7, if it's on the current 685, you're gonna go up about $569 a year.
But
In
of course,
taxes.
11.7's not what we would end up funding. It
No,
would be less
I
than that.
understand that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, but in-
still, it's not a small amount.
No.
No, it's
And
it's not.
if you put it on the people that are coming in and building, and you say, okay, well, you're gonna have to pay a lot to hook up, how expensive are those houses gonna be? I just worry what it's gonna do to the value of the homes in the village. Because people aren't gonna wanna spend, you know, X amount of dollars for a house and then get priced out due to taxes, because it's already crazy high. So that's my concern, is that we're gonna do all this, and it's great, and, you know, 4% of the lake will get cleaned up, and you're gonna wreck the economic engine of this town. That's my concern.
So
Less
we're,
than 4% of the lake, because we're
Yeah.
only one in.
Yeah.
so you're identifying why alternate funding sources are so important and not going to a bond.
Sure, yeah, of course.
Well, I mean, you're gonna go to a bond vote, you're not gonna find funding
and
that's gonna
until
pay
they-
for it all.
They gotta approve the bond vote before you can get any of that funding. So you're rolling the dice a little bit.
Or voted 3 times.
Voted 3 times.
Yeah.
I mean, I think,
Well, I think-
going at the bond vote, we'll have a
Yeah,
general
we expect
idea
that,
on
yeah,
what it will be.
Absolutely. Yep.
So,
Yep.
we won't be going in saying, well, it could be
Yeah.
0, could be
I mean,
half.
you want to be as transparent as you can be
Yeah.
to people, and I think that, remember, wasn't the previous project, the first bond vote didn't pass, and I think part of it was that was put on the tax base.
Yeah, yeah, I think that they
Yeah.
tried to put on the
Yeah.
tax base and that didn't pass on. Yeah.
So, but again, that's another discussion, is how
Yeah.
much of the cost is on the existing sewer customers, is any on the town tax base? That's gonna have to be a separate discussion, yeah. And the pros and cons of each approach, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
So-
and I think, you know, going at a bond, I think it's important to sort of say, if it doesn't pass, what would be our next step?
Yep.
You know, not go through any big engineering study or anything like that, but do we have, you know, second, you know, what would be our approach?
So this is an overall schedule here, a lot of detail in here. As I said, the state, in your permit here, you know, wants to see everything done, complete, and in compliance right about here, the end of 2022. When we build the schedule with the wick drains, you know, again, it just adds time. So for example here, you know, we're looking at the construction period here for the wick drains. But if you can see this, we're really sitting and just letting all that kind of settle, that consolidation occur for about 10 or 12 months. So what that means is we really can't break down and start the construction really on the treatment plant itself until, you know, really the spring of 2022 here. So this is still a pretty aggressive schedule, and this is all contingent on, you know, a positive bond vote in March. So if it doesn't pass, then it starts to push things to the right a little bit.
So, I mean, you know, having this delay in the project and having it take, you know, instead of a year and a half, 3 years, or more, you know, does benefit us, assuming there'll be more users in 3 years than there is today. So, but we can't really guarantee what that is. We see some development happening, but, you know, we've got other constraints, and the economy could always impact that.
And we think that, let's say we hit this timeline in that year while we wait for everything to settle. I'm assuming we're running on the smaller lagoon system, right? Because we're doing this on one of our main lagoons. And I don't know if we can handle that capacity or not. If not, I assume, if I heard you right, the state is sort of, well, you're moving forward, so.
That's right.
They're not gonna
But
go
Yeah.
crazy.
I don't think we would be
No, I
able to
don't think so.
violate our permit.
No.
We would just have to meet the existing permit
That's right.
with the system we have.
Yeah, so the state doesn't require that the new permit limits, or you comply with those until everything's complete and functional down here. Currently, you just need to comply up until that point with the existing permit limits, which are different. It goes back to your previous permit limits, yeah.
So our new one is phosphorus, nitrogen, and ammonia. Those are what we have to meet today.
Phosphorus and ammonia, no, those are the newer limits. You already have a phosphorus limit, but the lower limit on the phosphorus isn't gonna come into play until
Okay.
you're operable out here,
Okay,
that's
okay,
right,
until
yeah,
you're
yeah,
built.
yeah, that's
Okay.
right, yeah.
It's on a compliance
As long as you're making progress to meeting this end date, and, you're gonna be able to comply with the lower phosphorus limit and
I
the
got you.
ammonia limit, then you're okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
But it's fair to say, you won't, you know, you'll go into a bond vote and we'll say, here's the cost, explain the whole thing, here's the cost, here's our expected funding ability, here's our estimate of the number of users, and so, you know, here's the bond, and then this is what we expect the end user cost will be, or the town, however it's done. But you won't really know that till the very end. It'll adjust a little bit. Could go up, could go down a little
Yeah,
bit.
well, it can't go up, you can't
No.
spend more than your bond
No,
authorization.
but I mean the
Yeah.
actual cost per
Yeah,
person.
that's right, yeah, yeah.
I
Oh,
mean,
yeah,
we'll
yeah,
estimate what it is
yeah, you're
based
right,
on our
yeah,
best
yeah.
guess.
And what's interesting about this too is the new rates really wouldn't kick in, and I gotta be a little careful because the state's changed this. It depends about how you define these projects, but, you know, your first loan payment isn't due
Right.
out here now. That what they may do is call this a project, so you may have one due a year from the end of the WIC drain, so you may have one due in here. But like the major part of the work, you know, you wouldn't have your first loan payment due until about a year here. You're already into, you know, the end of
2023, yeah.
2024, so
Yeah.
the increase in the sewer rates would be out there a little ways. Okay,
How many other, side question, how many other municipalities are in this same boat?
none.
How is that when
So-
we hear about all the
Yeah, so.
issues the other places are having?
So there's a few things with that. It just, different places are in different, you know, different places and different sizes. So as far as the phosphorus TMDL, that is not affecting every treatment plant in Vermont. It's only primarily affecting the ones that go into the Winooski and the Missisquoi River basins. So any of the plants that are located along the Winooski, Montpelier, Barry, you know, Essex Junction, South Burlington, all those facilities are gonna have to comply with a lower limit. A lot of those plants have already constructed improvements over the last few years to be able to get to that lower limit, like South Burlington already did that, Essex did that back 3 or 4 years ago.
And they're more active plants.
That's right, yeah.
Ours is
Yeah.
just the lagoon sort of inactive plant.
Yeah. Or up in the Missisquoi Basin, you know, either their flows just have an increase or they're not looking at any growth that's really gonna trigger that. There is one community up there that's probably gonna be faced with a similar situation. They have a lagoon and, you know, they're not gonna be able to comply. The other thing that's different, well, so there's 2 other things different with Hinesburg, is that these other facilities aren't seeing that lower ammonia limit. Because you go into the low Platte, which is a very, very small receiving water, so that's unique to Hinesburg. And the other part of it is you want more capacity. Now, would you have more or want more capacity if you didn't have to deal with the phosphorus or the ammonia limit? But it's already there, the cost is there, so you're kind of getting that, you know, in that alternative anyway. So those are the things that are probably, but no, it's not, you know, every municipality that's facing this isn't. It's probably limited to a handful at this point, so.
And it's, I'll say this, every time we talk about this, it's important to note that we're not doing this because we want additional development or new development is driving this. We could stop building everything right now, stop all new development, and still have to spend this money.
So that's a good point. So another scenario could be is, you could do either number 2 or 3 and stay at the 250,000. The thing is, though, you're not gonna take that 11.7 million and knock $4 million off it. There's kind of a scalability component. You may be able to cut that down by 10 or 15%, but, to maybe something, but it's not gonna cut the project cost by 40%, so.
And you'd spend a far more if at some point you wanted to go in the other direction.
That's
And
right.
likely
It'd
far
be
more-
impossible.
That's
Likely
right.
far more per user
That's
because
right,
they're
yeah.
not spreading it around the cost.
Right, good point.
I don't want to take this up, but I have one question.
Sure,
Maybe you can
absolutely.
answer, and maybe you
Yep, yep.
We touched on it a little bit, I think, the last meeting. So this whole state phosphorus, ammonia, right, are limits. I know they're testing at the wastewater pipe. Are they also testing the river itself, do you know? And I only think in terms of, we're talking wastewater, but stormwater, if you're up from our pipe and that
Yeah,
gets impacted, are we gonna still see state coming in saying, hey, by the way?
They would have had, when they did the modeling for that, they would have had to do some sampling down there, but I can't speak to when
not
that was
sure.
done, how much of that was
Okay.
done, yeah.
Well, our sampling is done, as it's exiting the plant before it gets to the river,
Right,
so.
yes, yeah, okay.
But there would have had to have been some sampling done in the river over the
Right.
last 3 or 4 years to model that and come up with those numbers, you know, something that was scientific.
Particularly-
yeah,
Discussed.
yeah.
For
Yeah,
the
that's-
ammonia, yeah.
Yeah,
That's just
for the
my
ammonia,
worry
yeah,
is,
yeah.
you know, we go through all this and then, oh yeah, by the way, your stormwater impacted the river, so.
Yeah.
That's kind of thing, so. Okay.
Okay, so this is it. I know I've gone all over here, but,
No, it's okay.
Yep, next steps, so, working on the income survey, to confirm your eligibility for the USDA grant.
When do you expect that? I know
I was
you
actually
started
gonna
the
check
process.
back with him. I know he was tied up. I'll drop him another email and just see where he's.
talked to him today.
Oh, you did? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yep, and he and I had a bit of a conversation, and he was going to circle back to you.
Okay,
So
all right,
we're moving forward.
okay.
So maybe a month or so to get
I'm
that?
not sure what his
Okay.
availability. It's gonna take him a little bit of time. I'm
Gathering
guess-
information.
Yeah,
There's a
I'm-
lot to gather.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. I'm guessing, you know, we're in the middle of August.
Yeah.
We're saying around October.
Yeah, that's what I
Okay.
would, yeah. Pre-design, not anything need to discuss further, but one of the things we did talk about with the schedule is getting some of the field work and things done this fall. What that did is if, you know, depending what happens with a bond vote, it allows you to start the WIC drain, the subgrade improvements sooner next year and really get that done within the construction season. Otherwise, it starts to delay things and push things to the right a little bit further. Funding sources, if the town is eligible for the grant, then we'll want to submit the RD apply application in December. You know, we'll have to start that process in, early November, end of October. And then bond vote preparation in March 2020. And, you know, as you go forward, you know, we can talk about the next steps. I think there was some discussion with a working group about maybe hiring some kind of PR firm, communications firm, and starting that sooner than later, just to kind of help through that. You know, with this situation you're in here, more is probably going to be better, so that's something we can continue to think on and as we move forward. Okay. I think that's it.
I just want to say, obviously, I'm not thrilled, but I want to
Yeah,
thank you because
sure.
it's not you. I know it's
No,
my
I know.
anger's
I don't- I'm
focused
not-
elsewhere,
I'm
but
not- I'm not
I
thrilled.
appreciate your work.
I'm not thrilled to be in this position
Yeah.
either. So.
Just to be clear.
Yeah.
But I think it's important because, you know, this whole working group thing was really great because people are really engaged and, you know, I'm not up here presenting a $11.7 million project. I mean, everybody was involved, saw it, touched it and said, you know, these are the alternatives. This would kind of make sense. And I think we all would have liked to have gotten through this and found an option that was less expensive and less costly. But we landed where we are and so.
And I will say, we didn't choose the SBR solution because they did provide donuts down in Queechee. I just said to say that.
That was not the reason.
No, that was not the reason.
Yeah, Jeff.
But it was good to see, you
You
know,
sound like I've
the
been
systems.
ranting
And
for the past few
obviously,
years.
those
You sound-
active systems,
Yeah.
I'll call them active, and I'll
It's
call the one we
ridiculous.
have now as passive. I mean, it's, you know, you've got an extra person in there too to help run this thing, because that, you know, SBR system's active, just going all day long and all night long, kind of. So, it's, you know.
It was very helpful to go and actually do those visits and was- learned a lot and was able to put the pictures of things that you were showing us, actually see them in use and talk to folks.
This is kind of beside the point, but I got to tour the Essex treatment plant, and
Yeah.
they have a thing where they take the sewage sludge and they have a name for it, but they give it to,
Centrifuge.
okay,
Yeah,
they
to
give it,
dewater the sludge, yeah.
and they give it to the farmers
Yeah,
to,
yep.
would we be able to do anything like that? What are we gonna do with our
It's not very,
sludge
it's not
storage?
very scalable. You know, the equipment,
Oh.
if you saw in that building, that whole thing
Yeah,
was
it's huge.
probably a couple $1,000,000, and you guys just wouldn't use it enough to make it cost effective. So, you know, you're gonna take the liquid sludge, it's gonna go into the tanks, you'll try to thicken it on site as best you can, you know, and that's gonna get hauled over to Burlington or some facility where it's gonna get dewatered. Just don't, especially in the early years, just don't generate enough to make it cost effective to
So
have that
Burlington
equipment on
has the
site.
dewatering
Yep.
equipment, so we would truck it.
Yeah,
There, and other people are doing the same thing.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it's not ideal, but it's
to-
not cost
yeah.
effective to do it any other way.
and then what do they do with it after they dewater it?
It's part of the CSWD, so I think it's going over to New York for composting possibly.
Okay,
Yeah, it's still a reuse.
good.
You could land apply, but they've got, you know, 2 million gallons worth of storage there that they leverage, and, you know, you can only obviously apply that at certain times of year, so then you're building quite a bit of storage. It's also getting harder to find, you know, certified property and land to do the land application, unfortunately.
Have we looked at any, and I trust that this went through around, but any type of like pre-treatment where it's closer to the end user house and it goes through that and then comes down? I guess the cost would be, still gotta construct that
Yeah,
too,
yeah,
but
yeah, and operate.
it
Yep.
doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, you decentralize your operation, and that
Yeah.
just becomes a mess.
So along those lines at the CREC meeting, there was a professor from UVM who's been working with fungi to do pre-treatment for sewage. Is there any possibility we could make use of something like that? Kind of a new thing?
Yeah, the only thing that you could probably, and it probably wouldn't affect what you're doing down at the plant, is maybe for some of the, you know, industrial customers with some of the breweries, they obviously could always do more treatment. There'd be some benefit at the plant, but probably not enough to really bring the cost down or much. And again, that's the equipment and all that stuff to do that can get pretty costly too. And, you know, that's not something the town probably wants to take responsibility from an operations nor probably do the business owners with the kind of scale they're at this point.
So, I mean, Saputo did at one time
Yeah,
do
they did,
some
yeah.
preliminary treatment because they had a lot of waste right there, and so that's been shut down. You know, I think Randy and Eric and his team have really, we talked about this already, really worked with some of the industrial dischargers and, you know, focusing on really best practices. So there's been some really good work done.
Yep.
And potentially, they may at some point have a little bit of pre-treatment, depending on what they're discharging. I imagine our ordinances will, you know, at some point get a little more in depth or a little more
More
granular.
and start to look at individual dischargers and sort of have requirements there. Right now, we're working really well with them, it seems. They're open to, you know, improving, they understand, you know, the impact they're having, and it's in their best interest, because if we can't do it voluntarily, we're gonna have to find a way to do it, because it just adds more cost down at that far end and makes, you know, a big slug of untreated discharge with high BOD into the SBR would be difficult.
That's a good point. I mean, you can reduce the BOD, which is one of the parameters that measures the strength of the wastewater. That in itself, by reducing that, isn't necessarily going to help you a whole lot to try to better remove the ammonia or the phosphorus down at the plant, so,
But it
All right.
reduces cost.
yes. Yep.
Right. Okay, so, for us, the select board, what are our next steps? Are we waiting to hear back from you, Wayne?
Probably, I guess. I mean, we'll kind of have the income survey kind of roll along, see
Yeah.
where that goes, and that's going to drive whether we can submit our de-apply application. It's probably worth regrouping here, maybe 2 or 3 months from now, I guess, and kind of exploring the
Okay.
funding
I
options.
think it
and-
would be good
Yep.
to look at, the communication and
Yep.
outreach
Sure.
and sort of outlining at least a plan. So
Yep.
we say, all right, we start here, and maybe there's some preliminary things we can start, like tonight. Some people
Yep.
have heard these numbers, so I think it's important that we sort of talk about the fact that these are the numbers. They are pretty good estimates. The amount of grant and assistance that we're gonna get, we don't know yet. There's some sources there. I think it's fair to say we'll have good discussions with our representatives. The least that'll come out of it is we'll be able to express how disappointed we are. But the best might be, we might get them to take a look. And we got a new legislative session coming up, and, you know, they have battles about this stuff, and potentially we might be able to help sway where some of the funding goes. So that's always a possibility. So I will at least reach out one more time and see where I get on that piece. I know where some of them live. No, I'm sure that would be helpful. All right,
Okay, good.
thanks, Wayne.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks, man.
thanks, Eric. You're gonna stay here for anything?
Don't think I've any.
One more thing?
Talk about the well.
Yeah, while we're here, we can just sort of talk about the well. I think
Yep.
we realized the camera
Yep,
isn't hooked up yet. We're waiting for that.
the camera actually showed up this afternoon.
Okay?
They are completely booked with work.
Hey, Wayne, don't forget to take a couple pictures.
Yep. They're completely booked with work today and tomorrow. They're going to film first thing Monday morning.
Okay.
Yep.
And so 2 or 3 weeks to have somebody analyze what they're seeing?
Oh, no, we should be able to analyze it sometime next week.
That would be Cindy, who would be the
Yeah,
one
you know, Cindy and I will-
representing us?
We'll go through and watch the film and look at it.
Okay.
then
And that's a decision whether we consider drilling deeper.
Right,
And also understanding the condition of the well
right.
itself.
I mean, the not great camera job we already did was promising. It appeared that there were multiple fractures below the initial big one that they'd identified. Whether water producing or not, we couldn't tell with that camera. So this camera should make,
And wouldn't it also inform another option of moving adjusting the pump a
right,
little
so
bit?
yeah,
So that
if you,
could potentially-
if we only have the one water producing fracture, it makes sense to put the pump right below that, that fracture. But if we have multiples, we'll drop the pump further, upsize it a little bit, and have all that extra volume.
And
So,
so, I think we asked, or, yeah, well, I guess we asked for a little more detail in, how we move forward. So what happens
Right.
next month, what happens in the next 3 months, what happens in the next 6
Right.
months?
Yeah, and the stuff I gave you from her, of course, was before we had the camera issues. You can't read these too well, I'll have to send them to you digitally, but I also had Wayne do a projection of, once the well's going, the project,
Yeah.
timeline.
Right,
And, yeah, I put them on the biggest paper I have, but they're still small.
okay,
So-
well, no sense in sending them again.
Okay,
But we should
Oh
get
my
that
goodness.
electronic.
Do you have an electronic version?
I do.
Okay, if you could
And-
send that.
I'll send it in the morning.
And I think,
Yeah,
we would then, I mean, because this is a discussion, if we're talking about wastewater bond, we're gonna need to understand, well, what about the water too?
Right.
So if it wasn't for the new permit, we would be talking about the water. We wouldn't
Right.
be talking about the wastewater.
Right.
And we'd be saying, hey, this is important for future development. So now we've got this wastewater piece in there and, you know, we're not gonna be able to share it with new users unless we have water to go with it.
Right.
So it's
Yep.
like a twofer.
It is. Yeah. Yeah, it's a right and a left.
So we need to see that too,
Yep.
so that when we have the further discussions on bond votes, we gotta
Yep. I'll
understand.
send the electronic to Renee in the morning.
Okay.
Yep.
So I mean, I guess as we move forward, I could see, you know, we have our wastewater committee. Maybe they stay together and help with the, I'm gonna say advertising, the publicity and help, you know, educate the town on what we're trying to do, why and whatnot. Or maybe we get a couple of other, you know, a couple board members and a couple of other people who do that. But I could see us having an active committee through this process to the bond vote.
Yeah. It's like Bartles and James, we need all the help we can get. Yeah, showing my age on that one.
All right, any more questions for Wayne? All right, or Eric?
Depressed enough.
Yeah.
I know it.
Well, you go through the phases, right? I've already been through the first. I've heard these numbers, so I've come to acceptance at some point.
The good news about drinking water is they have a 25% construction loan subsidy that's available, and that's first come, first served, so that's pretty rare,
Mhm.
so.
Okay. All right,
Awesome.
good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Guys, take a peach on your way out.
So whose peaches are these?
They come from my couple trees.
Nice.
Did you sign in?
Yes,
Thank you.
And take a couple, and then, you know, by tomorrow morning, they'll be ready.
All right. Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda, we talked about the alarm ordinance. We saw this, I don't know, 9 months ago?
And December,
In when?
December of 2000.
December. And so we've got a few slight changes in the ordinance than what we saw in December. I'm not sure exactly what changed. But we did, I mean, it's recommended at that point, I think Chief Anthony was representing the ordinance, but I think Frank, when he was chief, he was recommended we move forward with something like this. I certainly, whenever I read the police blotter, first I check I'm not in it, but then I can see there's always a couple of these alarms, and it could be at CVU or wherever, and I don't think I've ever, maybe one I've ever seen that's been a real alarm. And there's a lot of data about the cost that people, you know, people and businesses put these alarms in, and the police and fire chase their tails for primarily way over 90% of them are false alarms. So this puts some meat in it that says, hey, if you got one of these systems, you've got to maintain them, you've got to tell us about them so we know how they work, and you'll be responsible to ensure they don't cause false alarms. I had just one question, was it said about auto dialers, you can't have auto dialers, and I was just kind of interested about that, what exactly that means. I know most of the systems go to a security folks at some remote place, and then they see the alarm, and then they make the calls. Versus, I think this is just something that just automatically calls without any human saying what's going on. So then, at the next meeting, hopefully we'll be able to review this with both chiefs and we can decide what we want to do. Do we want to adopt it? And I think we need to have a couple of public meetings to allow adoption. And then there's probably a chance for people to petition it.
So based on the requirements from the ordinance, you can adopt it at any point now, and then it would have to be posted in the locations around town, go into the newspaper, and on our website, and have the full ordinance text listed on that, and then I think it's a 45 days from that point that people have to appeal that decision. If it's not appealed, then it becomes officially an ordinance.
And there is some paperwork associated with it, so I think, we would want to communicate to people who do have some of the bigger businesses and
Right.
whatnot, CVU, the schools, let them know, here's what we got, and give them an opportunity to phase in appropriately, so.
Seems like the thing to do also would be to identify whose alarm has been going off the most and to engage them in some conversation as well.
Right?
I'm sure they have the data.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Yes, they do,
Yeah.
yeah.
What you don't, we could talk about this, and we will, but obviously, false alarms, put people in danger. Burglar alarm goes off, everybody gets concerned and shows up, assuming they're gonna run into some bad person, and then that false alarm, gets to the crying wolf, and, it's like, oh, just another false alarm. So, seems appropriate, and I think most towns, as they grow in complexity, end up with something similar to this. Next item on the agenda is the quitclaim deed. This is next year. We're gonna do some work this year,
So
but I guess not.
they're doing the work on all of the easements and the
Yeah,
utility
okay.
Pieces of it. And I actually had a meeting with them today, but tomorrow, next year would be when they're
The construction
anticipating the
happens.
actual construction.
So this is so this is Route 116, Shelburne Falls Road intersection, the light. It's basically adding turning lanes.
Right, so this is the same, exactly the same language you saw this is a two-step process. So what you saw was the option, considered the options thing, when it showed this same language. Once you approve it, sign it, you send it back to them, then they ultimately send us back a quitclaim deed to sign, and then we send that again.
And the reason they need the quitclaim deed is because to have a turning lane, they're gonna need to widen the road.
Right, so we are giving them this portion, and there's a temporary easements and permanent easements.
Right.
Very small portions, but
Very small
Purpose.
piece of Japrag, I think, just along the roadway. I mean,
to do
feet.
this work, yeah.
Singles feet. And then,
130 square feet, I think I read.
how much,
Yeah.
230?
1,230
1,230,
Yeah.
yeah.
size
yeah.
of this room.
Right. And then there is some temporary space they'll use during the construction. So,
Yeah,
all right, so do we need a motion to sign?
Yes.
I assume we do.
yes.
I'll make the motion for you to accept the quitclaim deed as presented by town administrator.
I second it.
All right, and signatures?
Yes.
I saw
Signatures.
everybody's signature?
I believe, yes,
I think so,
everyone's
yeah.
signatures on that one.
All right.
Go out of town.
All those in favor say aye.
Right?
Aye, so that motion passed. Next item on the agenda. Falling behind. Town administrator report.
All right.
Creekside?
Oh, yeah.
It's up to,
Yeah.
yeah, do you guys want to, so,
So this is, we talked about it, this is the stormwater system which they have, that was part of Creekside, which we added, became a part of 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I don't know, a while ago.
yeah, I think originally 2015.
And so now the proportion that we pay for and they pay for changed slightly because of the new road. They've reviewed this, they're okay with it.
Yes.
And I think we're okay with it.
Yep, So I met with Dan Jacobs, who is the president of that association. We went through, I found the documents where this was discussed in 2016 after the connector road was, to the length and everything of that. And so there were new, as you had explained earlier, there was a new, the acreage changed from what the original agreement was, which also in turn changed the percentage of the share, the cost share. So now it's 14% for the association agrees to pay. And let's see, the town agrees to pay 14% and 86% is the Creekside.
So that
And what
percentage
was
just
it?
changed.
I think it was 11% and 89% before.
Okay,
Yeah.
not a big change.
No.
I'll make a motion to approve the stormwater agreement with Creekside Association.
Can I ask one question?
Well, the second first,
Oh.
if there is one.
Sorry.
I'll second it.
There we go.
Go ahead.
I just have questions on 4 and 5, where the town is going to pay for all maintenance and repair of the collection system and any detention pond repairs needed due to negligence on the town. What is that?
So that is, was the original agreement that we'd signed back in 2015. The stormwater collection system is
What is
The
it for
town
all
owns the
Creekside?
stormwater
That's-
collection system as it is because we own those roads now.
right.
Okay.
Creekside roads are.
I gotcha.
town
Okay.
responsibility.
Thanks. That's what I was wondering. I was
Right.
like, how is it? But that makes sense. Okay. That's it.
So yes, the only changes that are on this is just what I talked about in paragraph 2, in number 2. And then I updated August 2019 for the date, and
And there, I don't know what it is, but there is some level of maintenance that's required, so
Yes.
the town, owns a small portion of that actual maintenance. They probably have to submit some report.
yeah,
once
so we do
every
a
couple
50/50
years. Yeah.
split for the
Yeah.
maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's brush clearing that has to happen, and there's different pieces to that we do share.
All right, so the signature's mine and
It'll
yours?
just be your signature, and then Dan
Okay.
Jacobs, the president of the association, will.
So we have
Turn
the
sign it.
motion, are we,
There's a second.
okay?
Yep.
All those in favor of signing the adjusted Creekside waste stormwater permit, stormwater
Agreement.
agreement, say aye?
Aye.
Aye? Okay, so that passed. Good. All right, next is town administrator report.
All right,
You did give us, I think, a written one.
I did. Let's get this forward. Do I have a spare copy? I do not. But I can. All right. So I've been working with Joan and Missy to gather all the necessary information for our auditors as they prepare for that process. And as I had mentioned, I met with V-Trans this morning regarding this intersection improvements. There's still more work that they are going to need to be doing. There is a possibility that there may be an additional easement, and so we may do this two-step process once again, but they haven't determined that yet. And they're just going through all the logistics as far as traffic for road closures for next year. And so I really emphasize checking in with the schools and timing, making sure that they really time the project so that we're avoiding those.
5 o'clock would not be a good
No,
time.
we're avoiding those morning and evening commutes, as well as the school going,
Yeah.
arriving at school and closing. So trying to focus a lot of the work in the summer as best they can, but it's going to spill into the school year. So we talked a lot about that. And I've got them to talk to CVU as well and the
Good,
district
yeah.
and HCS. So we had the bid opening yesterday for the Beecher Brook floodplain restoration project. That was the other piece to the highway project that Lewis Creek is doing and managing that.
Did it look good?
Yeah,
okay.
it came close, so the low bid was relatively close to what their estimate was. You know, just a little bit higher, but they felt good about it,
Good.
and so that was.
And will that work start this fall, do you know?
So it'll start relatively soon. Now they're getting the contract together and those pieces.
And can you say who the low bidder was, or is that not?
I'm not sure if I
available
can
right
say
now?
it yet. I think I know they were checking references and all of that piece to confirm. I mean, I can certainly say who the low bidder was, but they haven't awarded the bid that I'm aware of yet. But I think they're checking references. So, and let's see, Village North sidewalk. I always get to say that again,
They were doing some work this
They
last
are
week.
doing work. They're gonna be hopefully completing that if they didn't finish today,
Looks like they did.
tomorrow. Did it
Well,
look like
just
both cables
visually, it looks like
moved?
they
Yeah.
did, yeah.
I thought when
They-
I looked from a
they
distance
chopped
towards the north,
the
the old poles, yeah, I
so-
thought, I
yeah.
didn't see them so good. So that opens the door
So it
now
goes almost
for
the bottom level,
the
so-
construction contractor to begin their work. And they've gotta have to reassemble their team because they've been having to delay, so they've moved on to other projects. But, this will give them the green light to start that. So, and the tree at the corner of Route 160 and Charlotte Road, we talked with Paul Wizerack last fall about, getting prepared for the emerald ash borer. And we had Bartlett Tree Service did that work on the tree that's right at the corner of 116 and Charlotte Road. So they did the injections and they had to clear an area around that tree, did all of their work. And then I had Wall come back and mulch it, so that's been completed. There will be more work that needs to be done, and as the emerald ash borer does hit, there will be trees that die, and so we'll have to remove them, so we have to factor that into the budget, the cost of removal of trees and then planting new trees in their place and things. And good news, one thing I'd add is we did hire a highway maintainer.
Oh, great.
So Lucas Charbonneau will be joining our municipal team. He's going to be starting on Monday.
Beautiful.
Great.
So that we'll finally have the highway department
Back to full
their
Good.
full strength. So that's all I have.
Good job. All right, select board forum? Anybody have anything to? I have
Just the lot one thing was great, if you were able to get over there.
Oh, the pop-up park, yeah, it was a great day, good weather, couple of good pictures in the paper. Yeah, it was fun, and kids had a blast, so.
Do you want to say anything about?
Yeah, I was wondering a little
yeah.
update on where we are on the ambulance.
Oh, I can lead in by saying that I spoke to Al this morning, and the fundraising challenge at Obashan was met. Do you guys know about this fundraising challenge? So Obashan was matching up to $5,000 for money that was donated to the Firemen Association for the purpose of equipment. I talked to Al, as he has a laundry list of items that he could potentially put it towards, but they're saving it, and the match was met. It was like over $10,000 was raised, through the community from people donating money at the counter and then matching funds with Obashan. So that's good news. So we met, Marilee and I met with Al and Renee this morning to continue discussions. We talked about, what we're going to need to do immediately, because of course, July 1st of next year is coming up pretty quick, and even if we bought an ambulance today, it wouldn't be ready in time for all the associated reasons. So we are in the process of putting together an RFP to go out for the purpose of acquiring service on the 1st, and what that might look like and what's required, and with another component of what to do beyond that. Still no immediate decisions have been made on that as to, are we gonna create our own ambulance, we're gonna go outside, like we've identified, in the committee a dozen or so different,
Yeah, I mean, so the
Flavors.
last thing we had talked about maybe bringing in a consultant to help go
Correct.
through that process.
which is what the
that-
RFP is all about. So we're not at a point yet where we wanna bring in a consultant or ask for one, because we haven't really figured out what our ask is formally yet. So we're putting together that RFP based on other RFPs that are out there and kind of tailoring it to what we're looking for. Something that we had discussions with Al today. We've had discussions with other heads of other services in the area, including at the state level. We've started some discussions with folks at the state level and district level to better craft our ask. So we're narrowing down like how we're determining what it is that we need. So we've been really fortunate, as you know, to have St. Mike's just like come and help us, right? So what is it exactly, we're kind of asking the question, what is exactly have you been providing for us, and how do we ask for that if you're no longer doing it? So that's where we're at right now. And maybe Marilee has some of that too.
Do you need help from us, or?
Not,
do you feel
not
like
yet,
you're- Okay.
not yet. We're working in work groups, pieces of the committee working in work groups and kind of tasking it out. I imagine the answer to that question will be yes at some point in the near future, but tonight it's not.
Okay. All right. Any questions on that? I had a couple. I was going to talk about the actions by the BOD, talking with our industrial dischargers, and we talked about that already. That seems to be, going very well, so that's great. Also, I got interviewed, I think by Richard Watts with his group, questions about transportation and the Route 116 study. So I talked to him a little bit about it, and I assume there'll be some article, but hopefully I didn't overspeak, but I said it's something we've talked about, taking another look at, the CCRPC study on 116, and that, I would like to see the select board dedicate a portion of a meeting to break it back out, take another look at it, have some public input on it, and see if this is something, we want to pursue. And we also have, who is it?
Frank Torag.
Frank Torag, who we had said he was going to look at what other towns have done this, just so we could then talk with them.
And
too.
I did reach out to the state and talked about other traffic calming things that can be done south of the village, and have asked them to consider some other options right now too. They did form a committee. They just sent me an email yesterday of some of the what they determined, and they also did talk about and sent information about taking over sections of 116.
So they
the
sent
village.
us some information.
Yes,
You had
so if we
implied-
want to
yeah.
do this as an agenda item, I
Yeah.
figured I would save that so
Oh,
that we
that's a
can.
good idea, yeah.
have
So
that
you had
discussion.
implied like the state's like, sure, they don't put up too many roadblocks,
As
so to
far
speak.
as-
If we wanted to move forward,
Oh.
they would encourage it. so,
Absolutely,
yeah.
but there are
Which
some.
makes you wonder.
But
Yeah, right,
there's a
but-
cost to that, so
Yeah,
it
right,
does
of course.
detail that there
Yeah.
was a study, and so they sent me a copy of the study that was done that
The
really detailed.
CCRPC one or a different one?
I'd have to look at it, I
Yeah.
just took a look at it
Okay.
really quick, it might be the CCRPC study. But for taking over for a village, in
Yeah.
a village area. But there are other traffic calming things that they can do. They could do a painted island and narrow the lanes in that
Yeah,
area
wow.
too. So that was one of the things they suggested.
What you would consider the picture that I sent.
That,
Yeah,
except that
yeah.
they won't do the raised one, they'll only do a painted one. So I think what you sent was a raised one,
I
so
believe it
I
was a
sent that
raised one.
picture to them and talked about it,
Allows
but
us to
they,
run over painted ones, but not raised ones.
I'll look
What
over.
they're thinking about.
So would the painted island have signs in the middle of it? Because I think what made this effective was there were signs in the middle.
yeah. I'll have to look over, I mean, if we make this an agenda item and talk about it,
Yeah.
I'll be sharing that that report too, but I can send you
But,
guys.
you
a
know, I
copy.
think, so we see what other towns have done that have done this.
Yeah.
And talk to them, you know, how's it worked out, kind of thing.
Yeah,
And also, you know, talk with the state and say, you know, hey, we're not happy with the way traffic flows because of the speed and whatnot. You know, here are some things we'd like to do that are in a study. Can we do a couple of these, like add another crosswalk or two and whatever it might be? And let's see what they say. So I think I've implied like they're difficult to work with. Like I used the example of just adding those trees in the park, which look great, but, you know, it was not easy to do.
we've had a much improved relationship with
good.
the state, and we're really good. I've had, they've been very responsive to me
Mm,
on
it
a lot of
sounds it,
things,
yeah.
so hopefully they'll be open
And-
and more
and it-
receptive to
yeah.
talking about this.
So we've had some recent accidents in the south, heading south, just outside the village or right where the village ends. I will say, the police have been there 1 or 2 days a week, it seems, yeah. So I think they're, you know, they see that as a problem, particularly in the afternoon, because we had those couple of accidents, so.
Yeah.
Anyways, all right. Next is review the minutes from August 1st. Need a motion?
I'll make the motion to accept the minutes as amended if needed for August 1st.
All right. Are there any questions or suggested amendments?
I read them and they look fine.
Yeah, I didn't find a thing.
Come on, Melanie, there had to be something
I
in
did
there.
not
So-
find a thing.
So,
One question I had, I don't think I saw it anywhere. So at the top, under attending the meeting, we had all of the select board members, Police Chief Cambridge, and then our guest here was identified up there, but do we want to identify who he is? And
I could do that.
yeah, I know we often do that down below, and I was looking to see if he was identified down below
I'd
at all.
like to have him identified as Scooter
Yes?
McMillan, a fine man.
I'm sure being in the witness protection.
Partly why I'm suggesting that is because like he's not a town resident, so why
Right,
would he be
right.
here?
Yeah,
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 well,
okay.
and the reason I put Anthony didn't sign in, so Scooters was the only name on the list, so
Sure.
I thought it was kind of silly
Yeah.
to attach a
Right,
list.
yeah.
So that would be the
Okay, I
one
can do that.
suggestion
Okay.
if the group feels
Good idea.
it's needed.
Seems appropriate.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay, all those in favor of the August 1st minutes as presented with that one slight change, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And Tom will abstain because he wasn't here. He was here in spirit, I'm sure. For sure. All right, next item is consider approving the warrants. We need a motion. They're right there.
Make a motion to approve the warrants to include payroll as presented by the town clerk, as in
All
this
right.
binder.
I didn't see anything of specific concern. All those in favor say aye.
I'll second it first.
Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome, Val.
All those who want to approve it, even though Tom seconded it, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, so it passed. And is there anything else? No?
I think that's it.
So we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would be happy to make a motion to adjourn.
Okay,
Be happy to second.
all right. So all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Emilio.